Is this still recording? All right.
Yeah. Okay, tell it's recording.
It's a red light. I guess I could look at it on this side. Okay. Let's rock and roll. This is Linux Sucks. This is the 6th year I've done this? 5th year? Does anyone remember? I don't know. Anyway, my name is Brian Lunduke. You may know me from some of these things. I work for some various places, but I want to point something out here real quick. Those top 2 places up there, Network World and SUSE, have absolutely nothing to do with what's about to happen. In fact, I would really appreciate it if you are offended. Yeah, this is my disclaimer, that you don't actually tell them that you're offended. Just tell me like privately or something. I do some other stuff. I write some books. I don't know, whatever. So there are going to be some bad words in this session. Last year, there was some younger children in the audience. I felt bad about a few words that slipped out. So I decided this year, I'm just going to intentionally say those words and tell anyone who brings kids that they're terrible. All right. So the general idea here is fairly simple. We all are here because in some form or another we like or use Linux. However, we all think to some degree that Linux blows chunks. Raise your hand if you think Linux is just terrible. Absolutely terrible. It's just the worst thing ever, but half of you are lying. All right. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go through and talk about all the things that I think over the last year have been the most sucky about Linux. Now, if you are watching this on friggin' YouTube, and you only watch the first half of the video, you are retarded. Please, for the love of God, watch the entire video before making a comment. Now, let's get into some of the things that I think have really sucked during the course of 2013 and the first part of 2014. Oh, wait, hold on. I don't want to get in there. Oh, man. Oh, that one's there. All right, wait a minute, hold on. Which one? There we go. Sorry, just extra slides. So, one of the things that has really just got my panties in a wad over the last year or so, and this is not something new, this is something that's pissed me off for a long time, but it just keeps happening, is needless, senseless, ridiculous amounts of forking. Now, the greatest example, I think, is the OpenSSL thing. One little heart-bleedy problem, and someone comes along and decides, oh my God, OpenSSL will never work. We have to fork it. We have to put Libra in the title, because that's what we do when we fork things. And we'll start a whole new project, because obviously, having one of the most important pieces of software in the world is super easy to maintain, so let's maintain 2 of them. That will make us all more secure. And then, after it's forked, about 18 billion companies come together, including Microsoft, and say, well, let's put a ton of money into OpenSSL. So now we've got LibreSSL that's not funded and is probably going to break, and OpenSSL that is funded and still is probably going to break. Which means that half of the websites on the internet will now break at different times. And that's pretty awesome, I guess, except that sucks in every possible way. Now, if you look in the past, there's lots of great examples. My favorite example is the GNOME to Cinnamon thing. The Linux Mint guys came along and they're like, GNOME 3, how great. We can customize it to do whatever we want. So let's fork it so we're not using it, but we still technically are. And they created something called Cinnamon, which is essentially GNOME 3, but slightly different. Needless, senseless forking, which basically means that there's now 2 teams working on essentially the same code. How many people are familiar with Blink? So Blink is WebKit with a couple of tiny, tiny changes that Google made because they were using WebKit in Chrome, and they decided, well, we want to call it Blink? I don't know. Forking, needless, senseless forking. And here's the thing. It's dumb. Now, over the last 6 years that I've done this presentation, X11 or Xorg or whatever you want to call it has been on the list of things that suck every single year. In fact, this is a screenshot from the very first year I did this. It is the #1 item on this friggin' list. #1. Well, it's actually it's kind of the first 3 items. It is still really old, and we are still really using it. And we don't have the replacements yet. Now, Wayland is going to be the replacement that's going to fix everything. Where is it? Now, I'm not saying Wayland devs, you're doing a terrible job, but because it's not here yet. But does everyone remember, like 2 years ago, Canonical, Fedora, everyone was like, you know what? Next release, maybe the release after, we're gonna have probably Wayland by default. But you know what? If it's a little bit late, it'll be in the one after that, guys. Just the one after that. We're like 4 years in on this, or I guess just 3 years, but still, we still have X11, we still have Wayland, and we're still sitting in this crazy limbo land and Mir. I don't understand. Again, this goes back to the forking thing, except it's not forking, it's just creating a brand new project. But Mir is set to tackle the same problems that Wayland is tackling, in that it's creating a new display server. But now we've got X11 being maintained, Wayland being created, and Mir being created. So now we have 3 display servers. 2 of them aren't really shippable at this point, and X11 is old. That is driving what we look at on our monitors on every Linux machine on the planet, are those 3 things at this point. And that is one of the most underlying pivotal things that is on our computers. I mean, you could take off, this is theoretically more important than our Office suite, because without this, we don't have an Office suite. And yet, this is the state of it. I just think it sucks, so I call it out. Notice I don't actually have a way to fix that, other than Wayland needs to ship, and it hasn't yet. Don't mess with me. Is Wayland running by default on Fedora right now? Last comment from you. It's not shipping. It's not shipping. It's not shipping. All right. So along those lines, though, so Mir and Unity, and this is really Canonical. This is just a giant slide to tell Canonical to knock it off, is really all this is. And here's the thing. I'm not faulting Canonical for wanting to go their own road and be their own man and, you know, wear fancy tiaras or whatever. I don't care. But here's the thing. If you have good, working, configurable, flexible software, such as, say, GNOME 3 and GNOME Shell, which could have been modified to make it look like Unity and act kind of like Unity. No, they just scrap it and start something new. In fact, they've actually forked and redone Unity 3 times now. So it's just ridiculous. Stop replacing good working software with nearly identical brand new software. That's just a simple concept. It makes no sense, and it just makes no sense. How many people here currently run Ubuntu? Okay. Of you, how many are running Unity with Ubuntu? So about half the people that are running Ubuntu are running Unity. How many of you are annoyed with Unity that are currently running Unity? Only a couple of you. I'm actually a little surprised, so I'm going to move on. All right. Now, here's the thing, guys. I love the Beefy Miracle. I love it. I think that it is potentially one of the coolest names for a product ever created, and that's thanks to the Fedora guys. But then they come along with everything else. Heisenbug is their current code name for the previous release of Fedora, the current release, I guess, of Fedora. And it's bad. It's not as bad as the Utopic Unicorn or the Trusty Tar, but it's bad. I don't know any other nicer way to say this. And so I'll look at you, Fedora guy in the audience. Fix your freaking names.
No more names. We fixed it. And 21 onwards, no more releasing.
No more names?
No more releasing.
Holy friggin' Luya. Nice. All right. So we just today fixed that problem. So now Canonical. I mean, I appreciate that they picked a unicorn. I mean, that's ridiculous. But come on. They've already picked, like, the last 5 animals they've picked for the Ubuntu names, I don't even think are real. What the fuck is a tar? I mean, needs to go. All right. Let's move on to an overriding thing so we stop picking on Ubuntu and Fedora here. Simple here. Thousands of unpaid developers throwing code part-time into a giant internet-y vat of software. That's such an obviously great idea. How many people are familiar with the idea of the mythical man month? All right, it's basically the notion that if you have a piece of software and it's running a little late, if you throw a crap ton of new developers on it, it will make the software later. That is what we essentially have in the free software world. We have thousands upon thousands of well-meaning, well-intentioned, underpaid or not paid software developers just spewing little bitty bits of code out into the ether, out into the void, and we hope, beyond hope, that it all comes together and makes something beautiful. And sometimes it does. Sometimes it actually pulls together something great. Most of the time we end up with a giant pile of crap. It's not the fault of the individual developers. It's the man month. You throw more developers at things, things start going wrong. Notice we have a lot of software I had on that previous slide, like Wayland. Where's Wayland? Part of the problem is we've got this distributed things. We have some full-time developers. We've got some part-time developers. We have some people coordinating some of those developers and not coordinating other developers. And then they're all spewing code into this giant bucket of code spew. And that creates our software. This is kind of one of the underlying problems and things that in the free software and open source world we have to struggle with on a fairly regular basis. The problem here is no one seems to have really fixed it. No one has come up with the great solution for the way in which we have distributed, multi-thousand developer projects go truly smoothly without encountering this very problem that holds up so many of our projects. I have zero solution for this. No one seems to have a really good solution for this. I simply put it up on a giant slide with large text to vent, I guess. So, yeah, cat herding, exactly. Basically, we're herding thousands of cats remotely across the internet. So that's going to work. All right. In years past, I've talked a lot about funding. I'm not really going to talk about funding in the traditional sense this time. I've talked in years past about how some of our software stores kind of suck. You know, say the Ubuntu Software Center sales are negligible at best. They remain negligible to this day. I don't have a slide on it because you know what? I've moved on. I simply cannot put any more of my time into thinking about it or I'm going to get an aneurysm. But there is one thing about funding that I think is worth talking about, and that is the power that it gives you. So let's say hypothetically there's an open source project and it needs money. It's a really cool project. Let's say it's Wayland. And this cool guy right here sitting in the front row has like $1 billion that he didn't spend going into space. Now he goes up to Wayland and says, here, Wayland, here's all the money you guys need, or here's all the money I think you need. Here's a few $1 million. Now go forth and make Wayland great. And you're really altruistic. Everyone on the internet's super excited. But over time, this guy has ideas about what Wayland should do, about what Wayland should be, about how its name should change, about how the friggin' icon should change. And the power makes you go crazy. The power makes you start demanding things that are actually harmful to the project. The power is making you do things that a normal, sane person would not, normally do. Well, ignore this for a moment. I seriously hate this slide. But that power is difficult. Now, there are a lot of developers in the Linux world doing a lot of amazing work. There just are. We just simply have to recognize that. And there's a lot of great, I'm going to move off this because that's going to blind me. There are a lot of great companies, and Canonical is one included. I don't mean to pick on them. I don't mean to pick on them, but they are kind of the most prominent example of a company who's coming in to the Linux world and wanting to do their own thing because they have their own money. They're bringing their own resources to the table. And what you end up having are these two competing camps. On the one side, you have us, the community. We are the greater world of Linux and the Linux desktops and the Linux software and just because I don't want to get yelled at people, the GNU/Linux underpinnings. And that butts its heads with each other. Canonical wants to have its own desktop environment in Unity, and they don't really care what other people are doing. They want to have their own display manager, and they don't really care what other people are doing, and that in and of itself is not bad. But that power also, it causes some issues. They do have a community side and a corporate side. It's very hard to bring those two together. I also don't have a solution for this because power and money is always gone hand in hand, and people always go crazy with either. But it concerns me. All right, I want to talk about some overlying trends here. There's one thing on this slide that I think is insane. One absolutely crazy thing. Now, things are all over the map, and we've talked about this in years past about how things are trending and things going up and things going down and Fedora crashing and burning because it's fun. We've talked about a lot of stuff. But there's one thing on this slide I want to point out, and that's this line right here. Where the hell did elementary come from? This is just a side note here, but how many people here are running elementary as a distro right now? So 1, 2, 3, so only a couple of you. It didn't exist before then. Now, that's pretty remarkable. I was talking with the guy that started the elementary project just recently. They passed over the 1 million mark of people grabbing and using that thing. The reason I point this out is because at the same time, you notice crazy swings happening elsewhere. Here, let's go back to this big slide here. I got a point with this. So where's Fedora at? I don't mean to pick on Fedora too much here. What color is Fedora?
Yellow.
Yellow. All right. That's Fedora, right? 2002 Fedora. The king, right? I mean, if it's not Mandrake, it's Fedora, was kind of the deal. Or Red Hat, I guess, at the time. Now, in the same time, elementary's come up. Now, all right, where did Brian get these numbers, right? Does anyone know? Google Trends. Please. I use the end-all, be-all of all metrics, DistroWatch. Now, OK, this does not represent actual user numbers. What this represents is, within DistroWatch, their rankings of what distros people are interested in, looking at, and potentially downloading. That's really all this is tracking. So it tracks, it's a good way to track trends over time, not a good way to track actual numbers. But so here's where I'm getting at with this. In the spans of 2 years, the entire Linux ecosystem can change completely, to the point where, at least in terms of mindset, we have a nobody little Linux distribution like elementary coming out of nowhere and surpassing all of these granddaddies of Linux flavors that have been around for decades. And that is kind of amazing in that, let's go to this one, because that has way too many lines on it. That is kind of amazing because of the amount of effort put into these Linux distributions. Every single year, for the most part, these Linux distributions have 1 to 2 releases, for the most part. And every time they do that, it takes a huge amount of effort. A huge team of people have to come together to test it, to package it, to do the branding, to add new software features, to fix bugs. A huge amount of effort. And for all of those distributions, all of this crazy hodgepodge, this tangled web of thorny distribution lines, they all have to repeat that same work over and over and over again. So what we really end up having is the vast majority of the Linux world is focused on repackaging the same software over and over and over again for different slight variations of flavors of Linux. Considering most of these are kind of based on the same derivative, we can actually boil it down to this. This is the base underpinnings of all or most Linux distributions that are out there. And so what we end up with is people repeating effort, duplicating effort, and not getting additional work done, not providing new features, but instead just repackaging, repackaging, and repackaging. There's 2 problems with that. The first is the obvious one. We could have those people working on, oh, I don't know, something useful. The second problem is that is the most boring job in the whole world. Who does packaging? I mean, who deals with Linux packaging? All right, that guy and that guy. Would you guys say that packaging 2,000 packages for a new release of a distro is super exciting and is way up there on your list of things to do this weekend? Dude, Fedora, you're tweaked. All right. you are not reliable at all. So basically, we have a lot of duplication of effort. Now, does Microsoft have that problem? No. Does Apple have that problem? No, they really don't. And you could say, well, that's just simply because the Linux world is filled with thousands of Microsofts and Apples all doing their own thing, but we're really not. We're all using 99% of the same software. It seems like we could do something like we could all standardize on a Red Hat base even. I mean, that's a stretch for me because I don't even really care for Red Hat or Fedora much. But you could standardize on a base and everyone becomes much more productive. You have a common set to build from, and that just generally makes sense to me. So this year, I kind of wanted to spend a little bit more time on these. Linux has a lot of problems, but at the same time, it's also kind of amazing. And I kind of wanted to talk about some of the things that I liked the most about Linux, some of the things that make me most genuinely excited about using Linux, working on Linux, and talking to people about Linux on a regular basis. And this kind of opening slide is kind of the crux of it for me. This is the core of it. The fact that within our community, something occurs. We have an event. Something like the Heartbleed bug comes along, and everyone freaks the fuck out. And we freak out about OpenSSL. But at the same time, two interesting things happened with that. The first was someone came along and said, you know what? We have to fix this. We need to take a drastic measure. I'm going to fork it, and we're going to try it in a different approach, and we're just going to see how well it works. And the second was everyone on the internet thought, wow, how did we get to this point? How did we get to the point where something so critical like OpenSSL is not well funded? How is it that all these companies rely on it, proprietary companies, open source companies, and yet we don't have any good funding for this super critical project? And everyone reacted. Even freaking Microsoft threw some cash into the pot. They're like, we need to make sure this is great. So now, yes, we have two. We have two SSL things, but the reality is one of them is just going to end up dying off or getting merged back in with the other. And we will end up with the best of whatever they come up with. If LibreSSL comes up with a couple of cool bug fixes, they'll get merged back in, and we will have the best of both worlds. And that's because we have an environment that is fully open source and licensed in such a way that forking is possible. And you just need to do it. GNOME to Cinnamon. The Linux Mint guys, yeah, they forked GNOME to create Cinnamon because they felt like they needed to. And that really is the only actual reason they did it. Is there a technical reason? No. They could have used GNOME extensions and accomplished 99% of what they wanted with Cinnamon right there. But they decided, you know what? We're going to go it our own way, our own style. We're going to govern it ourselves, and we're just going to do it. We're just going to friggin' do it. And they did it. And the end result is actually a pretty good desktop. How many people use Cinnamon on Linux Mint? Decent, right? It's nice. Would they have gotten to a similar state if they had just kept with GNOME and done extensions? You know what? Probably. But they did it their own way, and the end result was good. The same with WebKit to Blink. OK, maybe that's a bad example. I think that was stupid. But sometimes the forking is great. Sometimes the forking is amazing. And sometimes you have an old, crusty piece of software that just works forever. How many people used X386 back when that was the display server? Right? Did it work? Yeah. How many people have been using a variation on X11 Xorg forever? That's your thing, right? It works, right? Do we need Wayland or Mir? Probably not, right? It works, right? Shut up, Fedora! But it works. And the fact that it's been around is kind of amazing. Now, I want to actually come back to this one real quick. It's a first-year slide. All of this is true, or was back then. But how many people have installed Linux on a new laptop and had the wireless work right out of the box? Yeah? 4 or 5 years ago, You ask that, like 3 people would raise their hand because they had to NDIS wrap or some crap and make their thing work. It's not that way anymore. Now, how many people still have problems with that sometimes? Wireless issues, a couple, right? Actually, I do because I buy stupid hardware. But the fact is, a lot of these items are getting crossed off. So in the last 4, 5, and 6 years, items that made our lives hell just simply don't exist anymore. This stuff, all this stuff, even configuration options. Now, how many people here use multiple monitors? Does it work? Yeah. Multiple monitors works. Now, I know that's not saying a lot, and Mac and Windows people would make fun of us for being excited about that. But the reality is, 4 and 5 years ago, things that were kind of crap, right? I mean, do you guys remember plugging in a second monitor and trying to configure it so you could actually drag a window over there 5 years ago?
Well, we used to be turned up to a conference, and the joke was the first 15 minutes of every presentation was trying to get
Exactly. The first year I did this, the first 15 minutes, I had 2 guys up at the podium R&Ring it to get this thing to friggin' work. Right? I mean, that was the very first year. And it was kind of funny because it was the first year of a Linux sucks talk and we couldn't get the friggin' out to work. But that's not an issue anymore. I came in, plugged in, it worked just fine. I've got 2 monitors, drag it around. I've got the slides up here, and I've got the little notes over here, which, sneaking surprise, I don't actually have any notes. But if I did, they'd be over there, and it all works great. Now, granted, Xorg is still old. This is mostly a problem for the Xorg maintainers at this point, because Xorg is old. It has a ton of old code in it, probably written by someone with the biggest neckbeard ever. And it just is hard to maintain. So yeah, we do need to get there. We do need to get to the point where we have replacements for that sort of thing. But you know what? We've got time. Is anyone at the point where they're going to die if Wayland doesn't ship? This guy might be. But otherwise, we're going to make it. It works just fine. It works with 2D acceleration. It works with 3D acceleration. X11 is working fine. And in fact, Wayland is making progress. So you know what? My general thought is take your time and get it right. And when it rolls out, it'll be great. Now, Mir, why do we care? Seriously, why do I or any of us care if Canonical wants to make their own display server? How many of you actually care? You care a little bit. Fedora cares a little bit. But why? But people on the internet freak out about it, right? I mean, how often do you go to a blog or Reddit or Slashdot or something, and someone's a little upset about what Canonical is doing, usually around Unity or Mir. Unity and Mir. Unity and Mir. Over and over again, people are either loving it or super pissed off about it. But why care? Why care that they're doing that? They're just doing their own thing. They're letting their freak flag fly, man. They're doing their own thing. And that's kind of the point. That's half the point of Linux, is that people go and they do their own freaking thing. When I was a kid, I was a very scrawny kid. I was a very white kid. I was probably the whitest, scrawniest kid in my Central California school. And I had 3 other very nerdy friends. And at recess, on the playground, we congregated together to protect ourselves because we're scrawny, nerdy white kids. And we managed to find we got one of those balls, like one of those big rubber balls, right? And we decided to play Foursquare. So that was our thing. We went off to the far side of the play yard. We played Foursquare in this little blacktop area because it was just us. And we picked Foursquare because there was the 4 of us and no one else we could play. We needed to make sure that none of the other kids came over and played with us because it was going to go bad because the 4 of us didn't really actually play Foursquare. We just kind of pushed a ball back and forth to each other. Because again, we were nerdy, scrawny white kids. At some point, one of the kids complained because he did not have a cool, squishy, rubbery ball to play with. The teacher demanded that we play with the other kids with our ball. But now when you have 30 kids playing with a rubber ball on the playground, what happens? What do you play? Dodgeball. You play goddamn dodgeball. Now, of course, in dodgeball, if you're a scrawny, tiny, nerdy little white kid with asthma, you die. I hate dodgeball. So let's talk about not invented here. Right? Why not? Why not let them do this? I mean, seriously, why would anyone have a problem with Canonical not using GNOME? Why would anyone have a problem with them going their own thing and doing Unity? Now, you could make an argument that, well, they're not being very upstream friendly, and that could be fixed. And you'd be right about that one. But really, otherwise, why have a problem with it? I made this point earlier, and I'm going to stress it again. That's why the slide is back up here. Please bring back the Beefy Miracle. How many people here like that code name? How many people here does it make smile when they see the everyone say Beefy Miracle. Beefy Miracle. Right? The release of Beefy Miracle, I thought was terrible. I could not get it to install on any machine I tried to install it on. And I never tried harder to install a non-working, for me anyway, distribution of Linux than I did for that version of Fedora because of that name. I wanted that running on all my machines because of that name. Do I want a utopic unicorn? Probably not. But you know what? Maybe someone who's like into like Hello Kitty or something is going to be into that. And you know, I say more power to them. Awesome code names. No one has code names like that. Beefy Miracle.
Promotions are easy too. Just give everyone hot dogs.
Give everyone hot dogs. See, that's the thing. Promotions are easy, and I love hot dogs. All right, the Mythical Man Month. Let's come back to this for a second. So we still just have the problem of thousands of people throwing ridiculous amounts of codes into gigantic code vats. But it's working. Do you guys have an Office suite? Some of you do. We have desktops. We have many desktops. We probably have too many desktops at this point. We have Linux distributions coming out of our butt in a rainbow of distributions. And it's happened. It's worked. I mean, you saw the previous slide here with Elementary, right? Elementary went from not to, oh my God, where'd that come from, in less than 2 years. They don't have some paid base. You know, companies like IBM, Red Hat, SUSE, and Canonical aren't coming along and paying them to do it. They did it all themselves. And it's just a ragtag fugitive fleet of crazy people that decided to just go, code. And they just made a distribution. And it's beautiful. And they did a great job on it. And they're not the only ones. And it's happening all over the place. And it works. And here is the problem with it working. It makes no sense that it works. How many of you have read like The Cathedral and the Bazaar? All right. That book is insane. It doesn't make any sense. If you haven't read it, read it. It's required reading for nerds everywhere. But it doesn't make any sense. Raymond wrote it, and he made a lot of really terrible points in it, and none of it makes any sense about software development methodologies and how open source collaboration works. It doesn't make any sense. It's not rational, and it's not logical. But here's the thing. It still works. It doesn't work 100% of the time. It doesn't even work 50% of the time. But when it does work, it works like gangbusters. It's kind of like the old adage of you stick enough monkeys at a typewriter, they're eventually going to make Shakespeare. We kind of have that in the open source world, except our monkeys are a little bit smarter. But it's kind of exciting that we have so many monkeys. So with money comes power. And with power comes craziness. You end up going into outer space and you make all sorts of crazy distros. It happens. But here's the thing. When you have too much power and you get to the point where you're going a little power crazy, say, you start taking chances and you start doing crazy things. And that's cool. Taking those chances and making those crazy things is cool. You end up with this. Is this what I use as my Linux distro? Hell no. Not a chance. I don't know if you could pay me enough. But the thing is, this is cool. This is cool. Does this look and act like other Linux distributions? No. Does this look and act like Windows or Mac OS X? No, it does not. And seriously, if I hear anyone else talk about how because there's a dock it looks like a Mac, I'm going to punch him in the face. Because that doesn't make a Mac. Anyway, But this is cool. They did their own thing. I mean, I don't even understand half of what they want to do in this thing. They put like a little dash here, and they're like, they're lenses. You can see shit. And I'm like, what? Okay, it looks like files to me. But that's awesome. They're taking chances and doing things, and I want them to do that. Do I want to run what they have? Not currently, but maybe in someday I will. And at some point in the past, I did. And I may again yet. But that's what I like seeing, and they're not the only ones doing it. We end up with, again, here's elementary. Killer job. How many people think that looks sexy? Because it does. It looks sexy. OK, that one does. It does look a little bit like a Mac. OpenSUSE, looking good with GNOME Shell. Fedora, also looking good with GNOME Shell. Good job, Fedora, not making it look like Windows 2000 anymore. Here's now Linux Mint. This is with Cinnamon. This isn't the best screenshot ever, but there's a big logo on it, so the Linux Mint guys will like that. But again, it looks nice. And it's not just how nice it looks. It's the functionality behind it is a little bit different. It's a little unique. And the ways they went about making it is a little unique. And that's awesome. This is what I love about this. How many people in here, raise your hands, are running the exact same distribution you were running 5 years ago? Really? What? Oh, not the same release, not the same version. Like how many? All right. Let's talk Ubuntu here. How many people, raise your hands, are you currently running Ubuntu? All right, so about a third of you guys. How many of you were running Ubuntu 5 years ago? Really? For serious? All right, that's a bad example. All right. Let's take a different track. OK. Raise your hand if you were running a different distribution 5 years ago. Let's start with this. All right, so again, about a third. What were you running 5 years ago?
I kind of switch off amongst Fedora, Debian, and Gentoo. 5 years ago, it was Gentoo. Now I'm on Debian.
Right? If you ask most Linux people, the answer is kind of like you. Like, well, let's see, I had Slackware for a while, and then I was off on Fedora. And SUSE was really cool for a year or two there. And then that's how it is. And this represents that. This change is not just what these individual distributions are doing. This represents the collective consciousness of the internet world, having a bit of a panic attack, I suppose, but constantly changing their mind and constantly changing the way we go about things. How many of you loved GNOME 2? How many of you were GNOME 2 guys? How many of you are using GNOME 2 or Mate currently? Just a couple of you guys. So that means you guys have changed your whole computing desktop environment in the last couple of years. Are you happy with it? There's a couple of nods, a couple of people going, I don't. But the thing is, it's change. It's constant change. It's trying out new things, and it's enjoying it. You guys are still here. Even after those changes, that tells you something. You guys not only liked it enough to stick with it, you came to a frigging event about Linux. So you didn't hate it that bad. So you didn't hate GNOME Shell or KDE4 quite as much as the internet led you to believe, is basically what it comes down to. And that's what it is for me too. I hated GNOME Shell so much. I hated it so bad. I wanted it to just die a Bernie death. I really did. But the reality is, now it's actually quite cool. Now, and I want to talk about this momentarily again, because I think this is rather exciting for a couple of reasons. Actually, is this the right one? Yeah, it's the right one. So, there are upstart distros, like Elementary, that are doing amazing things and really just taking off. But I want to talk about the granddaddies here for a second. These four and derivatives therein have been around for just frigging ever. And they've never really gone away. And that's kind of amazing when you look at how dramatic the changes are. And let's go back to this for a second. All of this craziness happening, all of these shenanigans going on, and these are still there. Now, my one bit of sadness for this year, Arch has been going slowly up since 2003, all the way until this year. Arch started dipping down. My initial hope was to slowly see this happen and then Arch to be the #1 distro by 2070 or whatever. But for the first year in over a decade, Arch went down just a little bit. But you notice everyone seems to have gone down a little bit except Debian-based distributions over the last year. Elementary is Debian-based. Yeah, so the elementary gave the Debian side of things a little bit of a boost there.
You count AG as more like OpenSUSE or Red Hat?
Okay, that's a tough one. I put it under the Red Hat banner, but Mageia is more of a Red Hat fork. But it's interesting to see this happening. And you know what? Honestly, Arch isn't going to keep going down. It's going to go like this, just like all these other guys. And the reality is, as much as I give Red Hat a hard time for this rapid and inevitable decline towards death, the reality is they're probably going to go back up. The reality is they're going to go like this all over the place, because just like all the other distributions, Red Hat, or more specifically Fedora, are out there taking chances. How many people have been watching like the Fedora Next stuff? Basically, it's Fedora coming out and saying, we want to change things up a little bit. Do we know how they're changing things up? Not really. We did an interview. I do a show, and we interviewed one of the guys from Fedora, and I couldn't figure out heads or tails what the hell the Fedora Next thing was, but I love that they're doing it. Like, I was trying, he's like, yeah, we want to make a Fedora workstation and Fedora Cloud, and I'm like, great, what do those do? He didn't seem to know. But I bet when they come out, they'll be pretty cool, and that's awesome. Even if I don't want to use it, it's awesome that they're doing that. OK. All right. Now, in the years past when I have done these presentations, they go up on the YouTube. And people get a little bit upset, because this word Linux sucks is together. And people don't like that at all. But if you really are pissed off and you want to yell at me, these are the ways that you yell at me the best. If you yell at me on YouTube and I don't respond to you on YouTube, I probably didn't notice that you yelled at me on YouTube with all of the millions of other people yelling at me on YouTube. So please don't yell at me on YouTube, because I will not notice it. Yell at me at one of those places so I can feel dutifully bad about it.
You mean you actually read the YouTube comments?
I absolutely do not read the YouTube comments. People email me and tell me about the YouTube comments. Yeah. So now,
I never read YouTube comments.
so it was interesting. In the preparations for this, I sent out a little thing, and I'm like, wouldn't it be fun to put together like a little video of everyone saying, Linux sucks and whatnot. I got amazing response, and hopefully when this goes up on YouTube, I'll be able to have all that together. But what I didn't get was what I asked for. What I got, and I thought I'll make a clip, and everyone will just be like tons of people saying Linux sucks all together, and it'll just be kind of goofy and funny, right? Did not get that. I got hundreds of rants of people upset about things like accessibility or multi-touch support, or half of them were ranting about Canonical. But they were upset. But it was interesting, because almost all the videos ended with people kind of centering themselves and then talking about how much they loved Linux. And I think that's absolutely amazing that we have a community, that we have a multi-million person community out there that's rallied around one core set of an operating system, a piece of software that we feel entirely invested in. It's, for a lot of us, it's an identity. Who would consider your Linuxian open sourciness kind of part of who you are? It's almost all of us. And yet, we go to a session called Linux Sucks. And yet, we yell about Linux on Reddit and every other website we get a chance to. And we just bitch and moan and bitch and moan. And we still, at the end of the day, we love Linux. And we still, at the end of the day, love each other. I think Red Hat and Fedora do stupid stuff constantly. But I love those guys. I love that they're doing it. And I think that they're some of the greatest, most intelligent people I've ever seen. But we can do that in our community. Within the Mac world, how many of you guys have friends that are diehard Mac users? Have you ever tried to complain about Macs to them? Have any of you had to go to the hospital afterwards? They get upset. They just can't handle it. But we can. And so I'm hoping, by saying all that that you guys go a little bit easy on me on the YouTube. But we'll see. Anyway, that's all for this year. Thank you guys very much.